There's a particular kind of stillness that settles over a television studio right before something unforgettable happens. No one in the room knows it yet. The cameras are just doing their job, the judges are just sitting in their chairs, and somewhere backstage a 13-year-old girl is trying to remember how to breathe. Then the music starts, and everything changes. That's the moment most people remember when they think of Courtney Hadwin, the shy schoolgirl from a small English village who opened her mouth on America's Got Talent and sounded like she'd been performing since before she was born. Simon Cowell, a man whose entire public persona is built on not being impressed, looked, for a few seconds, genuinely stunned. Now imagine, years later, if he ever sat with that memory a little longer than usual. Imagine if the runaway fame that followed, and the quieter, harder years that came after it, ever crossed his mind as something more than a footnote in his career of discovering talent. This is an imagined version of that reflection, built entirely on the real story of what happened to Courtney, and what it might mean for the man who first put her in front of the world. To understand what a reflective moment like this might even be about, you have to go back to where it started. Not on the AGT stage, but years earlier, in Heselden, a small former mining village near Hartlepool in County Durham. Courtney was born there in July 2004, raised by her parents Paul and Anne-Marie alongside her younger siblings. She sang around the house as a child, dabbled in musical theater, and slowly built up the courage to test her voice in public. By 11, she was performing at a school lunchtime open mic, singing Say Something. Someone recorded it, it landed on Facebook, and it spread locally faster than anyone expected. From there, she moved through open mic nights, small local competitions, and academies, training her voice year after year, all while her family found ways to support a dream that had no guarantee of paying off. Her father took extra shifts. Her mother believed early on that what she was hearing from her daughter was something rare. By the time she reached America's Got Talent in 2018, she had already been through The Voice Kids UK, Teen Star UK, and a handful of talent competitions across the northeast of England. She wasn't a random discovery. She was the product of years of quiet, unglamorous work that most of the audience would never see. If Simon Cowell ever thought back on the moment he first heard her, it's worth imagining that he wouldn't just be remembering a viral clip. He'd be remembering someone who had already spent years fighting for exactly that 30 seconds of recognition. Picture it again. Courtney walks out, visibly nervous, looking every bit like a shy teenager who wasn't sure she belonged on that stage. Then the first notes of Otis Redding's hard-to-handle hit, and something in her completely shifts. Gone is the awkward schoolgirl. In her place is a performer with a raspy, powerful, impossibly mature voice, moving with total confidence. Simon, a man known for keeping his reactions locked down, was visibly thrown. He told her she'd walked out shy and small, and then sang like something else entirely. Howie Mandel didn't wait. He hit the golden buzzer, sending her straight to the live shows, and said her voice belonged to a completely different musical era, invoking comparisons to Janis Joplin. The clip exploded almost instantly. Within days, it had been viewed by hundreds of millions of people. By the time she reached the later rounds, plenty of fans were already calling her a once-in-a-generation talent. Now imagine Simon watching that clip again, years later, not as a producer scanning for ratings, but as someone quietly asking himself what happened to that spark after the cameras moved on. It's easy to remember the 10 seconds where a talent show creates a star. It's much harder to sit with everything that happens in the years after. Shortly after the 2018 season ended, Simon signed Courtney to his label, Psycho Music, in partnership with Arista. She was 14. In interviews around the signing, she talked about how excited she was to make original music and stay true to herself, the kind of hopeful statement most young artists make when a life-changing opportunity finally arrives. What came next was less like a dream and more like an unrelenting schedule. She was expected to deliver chart-ready music, sit through interviews, and appear at promotional events, all while she was still a young teenager living at home and going to school. Behind the scenes, producers and executives were shaping her into a marketable sound and image, steering her toward a polished pop-soul crossover that didn't always match the raw, gritty voice that had made people notice her in the first place. She's since described the feeling of being told by everyone around her who she should be, and how she lost a sense of control over her own path during those years. Sessions stretched across countries, breakfast in the UK, label meetings by afternoon, a flight to a US studio by evening. It was, by her own account, exhausting in a way that had little to do with the joy that had first brought her to music. If Simon ever paused to consider what it actually looked like on the ground, not the signing announcement, not the press photos, but the day-to-day reality for a 14-year-old suddenly working like an adult. It's worth imagining that gap between the deal on paper and the person living it out might be the exact thing that would give him pause. Slowly, the visible signs of strain started to show. Her social media activity thinned out. Her presence in mainstream coverage shrank. Fans noticed and started to wonder what had happened, and without a clear public explanation, speculation filled the silence. Was there a falling out? Was something wrong? In reality, there was no single dramatic event. She was stepping back to protect herself and figure out, on her own terms, what she actually wanted from her career. Meanwhile, Simon moved on to the next season and the next round of discoveries. Because that's the job. A talent judge is built to spot potential, not to manage what happens after the deal is signed. There's no strong evidence Courtney ever spoke publicly with bitterness about that dynamic. If anything, she seems to have understood, even as a teenager, that being cast by someone is not the same thing as being mentored by them. But imagine for a moment, if that distinction ever nagged at Simon privately. Imagine if, somewhere between the next season's auditions and the next viral moment, a small part of him wondered whether the machine he'd helped put her into had asked more of a teenage girl than it had any right to. This is the part of the story that stays speculative, because there's no verified account of Simon Cowell reflecting publicly on Courtney's early fame in this way. But it's worth imagining what that reflection could look like, built from what we actually know happened to her. He would have seen a girl who described feeling like a character being directed, even while singing songs credited as her own. He would have seen someone caught between the artist she wanted to become and the product a label needed her to be. He would have seen the mismatch between an image built around comparisons to legendary blues and soul singers, and the reality of a young person still figuring out who she was, being pressured to lock that identity in far too early. He might have recalled the shock of that first audition, the moment he told her she came out shy and sang like something else entirely, and realized that the something else the industry then tried to capture and repackage was never meant to be manufactured on a deadline. Talent like that doesn't respond well to being managed like a product line. It's possible, in this imagined version of events, that he'd land somewhere honest, that the expectations placed on her arrived too fast for someone too young, and that the system built to turn raw talent into a career wasn't built with much room for the fact that she was still, fundamentally, a kid. None of this is a confirmed admission. It's a reasonable guess at what an honest reckoning might look like, if one ever happened, grounded in what we know really occurred, rather than in anything Simon Cowell has actually said on the record. While all of this speculation plays out in the abstract, what actually happened next in Courtney's real story is much more concrete. She spent several years working quietly, largely outside the mainstream spotlight, building relationships with independent producers. Among them was Kevin Bowe, a Grammy-winning producer known for his work with artists like Etta James and Joe Cocker, who became a key collaborator in her next chapter. Working independently, she began writing and recording music that felt honest rather than manufactured for radio. Songs like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, Breakable, and That Girl Don't Live Here, each built around themes of vulnerability, resilience, and identity. In interviews, she's described this period as a kind of rebirth. No top-down deadlines, no label mold to fit, just music that reflects who she actually is. The response has been strong. You Only Love Me When I Lie has been described by reviewers as a raw, emotionally direct blues soul track, one of the most powerful of her catalog so far. Her broader project, an album titled Little Miss Jagged, has been described as her boldest and most personal work yet, blending rock, soul, and punk influences without apology. Now in her early 20s, she's spoken openly about the toll her early fame took on her. Burnout, a loss of creative control, and the pressure to perform before she felt ready, emotionally or otherwise. Reclaiming her own voice, in both a literal and artistic sense, has become central to how she talks about where she is now. Today, Courtney lives a life that looks nothing like the whirlwind of 2018. She's based back in the UK, still calling County Durham home, having returned there to rebuild a sense of independence after stepping away from her earlier label deal. She stays close to friends from her early years in Heselden and nearby Peterlee, and her creative process, by her own description, mostly happens in quiet moments at home rather than in a high-pressure studio. She maintains an active online presence, well over 1 million followers combined across TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, using it less as a promotional tool and more as a way to stay genuinely connected with fans. Behind-the-scenes studio clips, honest conversations about mental health, and everyday glimpses of her life. She's talked candidly about finding some platforms occasionally overwhelming, while valuing others as lower-pressure spaces to share her music and life updates. In early 2025, she signed with a new management team, Total Artist Management under Oliver Mojita, after leaving her previous team over creative differences she felt were limiting her opportunities. With her new team, she's been booking shows across the UK and Europe, with plans for US dates as well. One major highlight came in April 2024, when she performed a Janis Joplin tribute at Carnegie Hall, personally selected by music industry veteran Clive Davis to open a gala in front of major industry figures, a clear sign of the respect she's earned as a serious artist in her own right, well beyond her AGT origins. She continues working steadily with Kevin Bowe on her debut album, expected later this year, blending rock, soul, and punk influences in a way that reflects an artist no longer trying to fit anyone else's mold. There's no confirmed moment where Simon Cowell broke down over what happened to Courtney Hadwin. But the exercise of imagining it isn't really about him. It's about making sense of a very real pattern. A young, once-in-a-generation talent discovered far too early for the industry around her to actually take care of her properly. The entertainment business is demanding even for adults who've chosen it with open eyes. Asking a young teenager to carry the same expectations, on the same timeline, without the same life experience, was always going to come at a cost. Courtney paid part of that cost quietly, out of the spotlight, before choosing to come back on her own terms. Whether or not Simon Cowell has ever privately reckoned with that, the more important reckoning has already happened, and it belongs to Courtney herself. She stepped back when she needed to, rebuilt her career independently, and returned as an artist making music that actually reflects who she is. That's a far less dramatic story than a headline about tears and regret, but it's the one that's actually true, and it's a much better ending than the one the industry seemed to be writing for her back in 2018. What do you think really should have been done differently for young stars like Courtney? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching.